Dear Holodomor, dear Holodomor survivors, ministers, Your Excellencies, we'll begin the memorial this evening by asking Dr. Yulia Wojcichin and Mrs. Helena Zelen, genocide Holodomor survivors, to light the memorial candle. Please. Thank you. And I'd like to now call on Reverend Father Andrew Nuferko to lead us in an opening prayer.
Let us pray. Господу помолімося. Господи Боже наш, ми сходимося в цей день, щоб вшанувати пам'ять наших батьків і матерей, братів і сестер, синів і дочок, яким ми через штучний голод відібрали твій дар життя. Lord our God, we gather today to honor the memory of those from whom your gift of life was taken away by starvation. There is little we can do for them today, other than remember them and entrust their afflicted souls to your mercy and bow our heads before their suffering. We also ask you today that we might be open to understand the witness of their sacrifice, which is that such horrors, ethnocide, genocide, and other crimes against humanity can and do occur. In the last century, there were many, with the number of victims in Ukraine among the highest. Невинні жертви Голодомору голосять до нас, що як довго люди не схочуть слухати твоєї спасенної науки, буде спокуса тоталітарними і насильницькими засобами розв'язувати справи людського життя. As long as people refuse to receive your salvific teaching, the temptation to resolve matters of human life through totalitarian and violent means will always be there. Today we ask for ourselves and for future generations the gift of sensitivity, that we might quickly recognize the presence of this temptation in our midst. We ask for the courage necessary to expose it, and for the strength needed to oppose it. But above all, we ask you to fill our hearts and the hearts of all people of goodwill with the virtues and graces that might make such horrific temptation impossible. Господи Боже, за заступництвом Пресвятої Богородиці та всіх святих, яких видала наша українська земля, помилуй нас. Through the prayers of the saints of Canada and Rus, Ukraine, Lord Jesus Christ, our God, have mercy on us and save us. Amen.
Dear survivors, Reverend Father, Honorable Minister Sajjan, Honorable Minister Goodale, Honorable Minister Hussein, Your Excellencies, and in particular, Your Excellency Ambassador Shevchenko from Ukraine, Parliamentary colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. 85 years ago, Stalin and his Kremlin apparatchiks brought to a conclusion their master plan for the genocide of Ukraine's rural population, the Holodomor. Behind barbed wire, Ukraine became a hell on earth. Her lush countryside, denuded, no grasses rustled, no birds sang. People ate anything that moved. The deathly silence in villages, only broken by the sound of wagons picking up the dead. One by one, 100 after 100, 1,000 upon 1,000, millions upon millions lay their famine-ravaged skin and bone bodies down on Ukraine's rich black soil and became one with their land. As millions starved to death, Stalin exported millions of tons of Ukrainian grain into the West in return for hard currency. His march towards empire was fed by the corpses of millions of Ukrainians and by the appeasement of Western leaders unwilling to face down evil. Today, as we memorialize, as we reflect upon the Holodomor, let's be cognizant that once again, on those same lands, thousands of Ukrainians are once again laying down their lives. In the 1930s, Stalin had his Potemkin villages. He had journalists like Duranty who fed the disinformation. Today, Putin uses hybrid warfare, little green soldiers, Russia Today, internet trolls for disinformation. On this 85th commemoration, in memory of all of those millions who perished, let us make a pledge. No appeasement. Більш ніколи. Never again. I'd now like to ask the Honorable Minister of Defense, Minister Sajan, to say a few words on behalf of the Government of Canada.
To our two survivors, it's good to see you again. To ministers, members of Parliament, distinguished guests, Your Excellencies. First, I want to begin by thanking the Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary Friendship Group for inviting me to speak again with you at this very important commemorative ceremony. I'm honored to represent the Government of Canada as we mark the solemn anniversary of the Holodomor genocide. Canada was among the first nations to acknowledge the Holodomor as a genocide. That is a testament to our bond with the Ukrainian people. And it affirms our belief that the world cannot prevent a reoccurrence of the sins of history if we do not admit what happened. On that note, I want to thank you for helping Canadians keep the memories of the Holodomor victims alive 85 years later. Its victims must never be forgotten. Humanity must learn the painful lessons of this somber chapter of our history on this planet. Canadians stand firmly with the Ukrainian people in condemning the forced hunger and atrocities of that brutal genocide. And in both words and deed, Canada is committed to help prevent such tragedies from ever occurring again. We recognize the value of being an open and welcoming society. We know that diversity makes us stronger. Just as we know that the more than 125 years of Ukrainian settlement in our Canada makes us stronger. Ukrainian Canadians have greatly contributed to Canada's successful multicultural society through their art, their culture, the ethnic, and the spirit of resilience. Canada and Ukraine have developed strong cultural, political, defense, business, and social ties because Ukrainian Canadians have helped us actively cultivate them. For our part, Canada is proud to offer our unwavering support and friendship to Ukraine. We were the first to recognize Ukrainian independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, and we are staunch in our political, economic, and military support for the people of Ukraine and for their territorial integrity. Last year, we extended our training mission, and we know that there's even more work to be done. And this summer, we extended our support as a framework nation and a leader to NATO's transport presence in Latvia for another 4 years. Also this summer, the Canada-Ukraine Free Trade Agreement took effect. It is great news for the economies of both countries. Canada will always stand with Ukraine in solidarity and friendship. And so in this spirit and of friendship, I offer once more, on behalf of all Canadians, my heartfelt wishes that we solemnly remember the Holodomor victims, that we will move to work tirelessly towards peace today and for all time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister. And now I'd like to ask the Honourable Senator Raynell Andrechuk to deliver or to speak on behalf of the Leader of the Official Opposition, Andrew Scheer.
Bldg, dear survivors, Holy Reverend Father, Excellencies, Ministers, and fellow parliamentarians, and dear friends. I'm here to speak on behalf of the Honourable Andrew Scheer, but before I do, I want to recognize that it has been some time when the Parliament of Canada embraced the need to acknowledge the genocide. The first motion was passed in the Senate in 2003, and the act was passed in 2008. So I want to very publicly acknowledge the work of our Parliament together unanimously in this endeavor. It is of singular pride to me and to, I think, Canadians that our Parliament took the initiative. So I very publicly thank our parliamentarians. And I'm very pleased today to deliver the words of the Honourable Andrew Scheer on behalf of himself and the Conservative caucus. I will just, without any further ado, read what he has asked me to say this evening. He wanted to say that he would be honored to join with the survivors here. Unfortunately, he has not made it back to Ottawa today. Tonight, we remember one of the 20th century's cruelest crimes, the deliberate starvation of millions of Ukrainian men, women, and children at the hands of Joseph Stalin. His goal was clear. In Stalin's view, Ukrainian farmers had nationalistic tendencies. In other words, he blamed them for knowing who they were and where they came from. From generation to generation, Ukrainians passed on to their children Ukrainian culture, traditions, and more importantly, the Ukrainian language, despite decades of strict prohibitions and discrimination. Stalin could not imagine the future of Soviet Union without Ukraine. And it's no coincidence that 85 years later, the Russian president struggles with the same problem. Stalin wanted to solve his problem the same way he tried to solve all others, by taking lives. The deaths of millions of Ukrainians came slowly and painfully as they watched the Soviet regime and its collaborators steal their last supplies of food before isolating them from the rest of the world. It was starvation by decree from Moscow, decrees demanding grain that couldn't be produced, decrees blacklisting villages that couldn't meet the quotas, decrees that withheld aid from starving regions, and decrees that shut Ukraine's borders and left people to die while the Soviet elite ate its full. Those that survived were kept behind the Iron Curtain for decades. Stories of starvation were whispered only to close family members, while empty villages were resettled with outsiders. The victims were silenced by the Soviet regime, who for obvious reasons did not want the rest of the world to know of the horrifying crime they committed. Ukrainians may have been silenced by hunger, but Ukrainians were not defeated. Ukraine's existence today as an independent nation and the willingness of Ukrainians to fight for it is proof. But today, 85 years later, Ukrainians have been forced to stand up for their country's sovereignty and territorial integrity again. Once again, the regime in the Kremlin is trying to undermine Ukrainian statehood. Lacking Soviets' power over life and death, the Russian regime works insidiously, trying to convince the rest of the world that Ukraine's existence as an independent state is illegitimate. Stalin, whom Putin admires so much, feared Ukrainians. He feared their independence, their unwillingness to submit to Russia's imperial projects. Putin, being a good student, also understands the threat a successful and democratic Ukraine poses to his power. This is why all Ukraine's friends around the world have stood together. It is why we have to remember the Holodomor and understand its relevance 85 years later. I am proud to say that it was under the previous government of the Conservative government in 2008 that Canada recognized the Holodomor as a deliberate act of genocide against the Ukrainian people. And Mr. Scheer goes on to acknowledge the efforts of Mr. Bazan that I see in the last row for introducing the bill and working with his colleagues to bring it to fruition. With fewer survivors among us every year, we are losing the last vital human links to these memories. It will fall to us to remember in future years, to defend the memory of these millions of victims against the flood of propaganda and denial that still flows from the Kremlin. Ukraine's history is being written every day. As we remember 85 years since Holodomor, we also mark 5 years since the start of the Maidan. That winter, Ukrainians made a civilization choice to rejoin the European family of states. Ukrainian soldiers and civilians continue to pay an unimaginable price for their choice. But they have made the choice, and their determination has not wavered. They are fighting so that Ukraine's past does not dictate its future, so that never again can one man in the Kremlin decide the fate of millions in their country, Ukraine. We will continue to stand with them unequivocally in our support of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and in their right to defend themselves from President Putin's aggression. Thank you. Bldg.
Thank you, Senator. À ce moment, j'invite député Guy Caron en place de Jagmeet Singh, le leader de MPD.
Survivors, members of the clergy, ministers, Your Excellencies, and fellow parliamentarians, I feel pleased and honored to be standing here for another year, to be able to deliver the remarks of the New Democratic Party on the occasion of the commemoration of the Holodomor. We gather here today to commemorate the 7 to 10 million Ukrainians who perished from 1932 to 1933 because of an intentional denial or seizure of food by Stalin. His clear intent was to deliberately starve the Ukrainian peasantry, thereby eliminating a serious threat to the integrity of the Soviet Empire. The repressive measures imposed by Stalin included agricultural reforms directly resulting in failed production, seizure of all harvest regardless of how meager, denial of success to store grains for basic sustenance, prohibition on travel to seek food, aid and continued exports of grain, and conversion to alcohol despite the famine. Many Ukrainians were also deported while religious, academic, and cultural leaders were executed by the regime. Meanwhile, both Soviet and Western governments persisted in denying the existence of the famine and the deliberate genocide. The Soviet government made concerted efforts to conceal the famine from the outside world, while the Western world sadly followed suit. It was not until many decades later, due in no small part to the concerted efforts by our Ukrainian Canadian community, particularly by the UCC and local affiliates, that our federal and Alberta legislators officially recognize this crime against humanity, and now each year we commemorate the Holodomor. In May 2008, the Canadian Parliament finally officially recognized the Ukrainian genocide with the passage of an act to establish the Ukrainian Famine-Genocide Memorial Day and to recognize the Ukrainian famine in 1932-33 as an act of genocide, tabled by Ukrainian Canadian Manitoba Member of Parliament James Bezan, which we were proud and honored to support. In October that same year, the Alberta legislature unanimously passed the Ukrainian Famine and Genocide Memorial Day Act, recognizing the Holodomor as genocide, and setting aside the fourth Saturday of every November as Holodomor Memorial Day. And I know my colleague Linda Duncan joins this commemoration every year. Yet while official recognition of the Holodomor has finally been granted by numerous other governments and other entities, the need continues to educate Canadians and others about the travesty of the Holodomor. I salute the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and its local affiliates who have continued these tireless efforts to make sure we never forget. And I count myself among the many Canadians who had minimal understanding of the extent of these atrocities until recently. As Canadians, we share a common responsibility to become better informed about past atrocities and genocides, including the Holodomor. I was struck by this quote from former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan on the cover of the Holodomor Victims Memorial booklet. Genocide begins with the killing of one man, not for what he has done, but because of what he is. There is no doubt our nation and others delayed far too long the recognition of the Holodomor as genocide. We failed at the time to respond to the pleas for intervention and assistance. And this was made clear to me by the work of Canadian scholars. I wish to share just one example provided to me by Dr. Bldg of how Western governments turned a blind eyes to the pleas for intervention made by Canadians. In October 1933, the Ukrainian National Council of Canada wrote to the then Prime Minister and leader of the official opposition, requesting that the Canadian government urgently lead a neutral investigation of the mass starvation suffered in the Ukraine, despite evidence of bumper crops. They offered to share evidence of these atrocities obtained from first-hand reports that were ignored. Documents suggest that requests to deploy Canadian food relief to the Ukraine also became mired in trade disputes between Canada and the Soviet Union. Despite concerted pleas by the Canadian-Ukrainian community, Mennonites and other religious leaders, and some politicians, including members of the Saskatchewan legislature and Labour Member of Parliament Humphrey Mitchell, the Canadian government could not be convinced to intervene. As Canadians, we share responsibility in demanding that our governments formally recognize and speak against atrocities and to take action to intervene to prevent or respond to potential genocide. As an elected legislator, I take very seriously my duty to hold the government accountable for delivering on these international duties and commitments, including the duty to intervene. A few years before official recognition of the Holodomor, Parliament also gave formal recognition to a National Day of Remembrance in action on mass atrocities. This was intended to recognize Canada's historic leadership in peace, international cooperation, and ending violence in conflict. It was also done in the hope that Canadians would be mobilized to intervene and make the prevention of mass atrocities of vital national interest. This particular cross-party initiative was triggered by the genocide in Rwanda and fear of the repeat of atrocities into the Congo. Recently, a group of Canadian parliamentarians and others have dedicated themselves to clarifying the triggers for intervention and appropriate responses. Romeo Dallaire and Bldg, with others in the All-Party Group for the Prevention of Genocide and Other Crimes Against Humanity, continue to campaign for Canadian interventions based on our responsibility to intervene and on our expertise, professionalism, logistic, and strategic capabilities. They remind us that Canada pioneered peacekeeping, helped develop the concept of a responsibility to protect, and led the way to an international ban on landmines. Commendably, this all-party group has continued to press for Canadian engagement where atrocities arise that may lead to genocide. Today, the Ukraine is an important partner for Canada. We need to support its efforts in pursuing both a healthy economy and democracy. I'm very proud to see our Parliament hosting Ukrainian interns year after year through the Canada-Ukraine Parliamentary program and the ongoing dialogue between our Ukraine Friendship Group and Ukraine parliamentarians. We must stand by our ally in seeking an end to the war in Donbass and expanding sanctions under Justice for Victims of Corrupt Foreign Officials Act against Russians involved in either the war or undermining Ukraine election. Each year, as we commemorate the atrocities perpetrated against Ukrainians, we pause to remember those who suffered at the hands of Soviet despots. We come together to remember the men and women and children who were made to suffer. But this day also provides an opportunity for Canadians to recommit to vigilance in delivering on our responsibility as Canadians to intervene in similar atrocities in the future. By our act of remembrance, we acknowledge our part in protecting the rights of people everywhere in the hope that we're building a better world. Slava Ukraini.
Merci. Now I'd like to call on His Excellency Andriy Shevchenko, the Ambassador for Ukraine, to deliver remarks on behalf of the Ukrainian government.
Thank you, Boris. Dear friends, I think tonight I'll speak not as an ambassador, but just as a Ukrainian and as someone who grew up in a family of Holodomor survivors. And my grandmothers did not tell me much about the Holodomor because, as you can imagine, it was not much appreciated in the Soviet Union. But they did share some stories. That's how I learned about times when people had to eat grass and snails, when they remember dead bodies laying on the ground, on the streets. I also remember this horrifying story of a lady who went crazy, who went insane, and as people said, she killed a boy in a neighboring village to eat him. So that's pretty much the stories that every Ukrainian family has to remember and has to share. 86 years ago, winter came early to Ukraine, just like these days in Ottawa. And for millions of Ukrainians already weakened by starvation, it made their chances to survive even slimmer. thousands frozen bodies would be found in spring when the snow would be gone. Millions would not make it through that winter. Millions who survived would carry for the rest of their lives the terrible stories and the terrible pictures of the Holodomor. Death, hopelessness, suffering, and lessons. Some of them are very practical, like you never throw away bread crumbs. Some of them are of greater universal importance. At that time, Ukraine was left at the mercy of a ruthless, cynical, paranoiacal dictator sitting in the Kremlin. It was not just a story of Ukraine. Estonians and Crimean Tatars, Latvians and Georgians and many Russians, there were many ways of repressions and there were many terrible things that they suffered from. We cannot change the past, but we can rethink it and we can avoid mistakes. And in that sense, Canada has played a crucial role in preserving memory of the Holodomor. As it has been mentioned, the first memorial to Holodomor victims was raised in Edmonton, Alberta. And as Linda and Jim can tell us, it's a very touching, sentimental memorial, which is shaped in the form of broken millstone. It was a Ukrainian Canadian, Jan Ignatovich, who produced the first feature movie about the tragedy of Holodomor, The Bitter Harvest. Due to the efforts of the World Congress of Free Ukrainians, the commission was established in 1988 to investigate into this matter. And as it was mentioned, Canada was among the first countries to recognize Holodomor as genocide. And we remember the resolution of the Senate in 2003, sponsored by Reinel Andreychik, and Bill C-459, sponsored by James Bezan in the House. And the same was done by many Canadian provinces, including Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, and Quebec. I think we can do the same in some other provinces which are left, and I would encourage us to work together on that. And that example was followed actually by many countries. I believe no less than 14 countries by now have officially recognized the Holodomor as genocide. That includes the US Senate, that also includes Latvian Parliament and some other countries present or represented here. In the US, by now we have 20 US states which have officially recognized the Holodomor. I think that shows you how much a powerful example of Canada can do in the world. Thank you very much for doing that. On Saturday, every Ukrainian family will light a candle and place it on the windows sill in Ukraine. We have lighted our candle tonight, and I'm very thankful to all of you, to MPs, to investors, to our friends for being here tonight. I would like to thank the organizers, the Ukrainian Canadian Congress and the Parliamentary Canada-Ukraine Friendship Group, and of course its chairman, Brzezinski. I would also like to thank ministers, members of the cabinet for their personal attention to this matter. I believe Minister Seyjan and also Marian Mikhaichuk, when they visited Kyiv, they visited the Holodomor Memorial. Minister Gudel shared a picture of the monument which stands in Regina, Saskatchewan, and I hope we'll have a chance to bring Minister Hussein to Kyiv and to get this feeling from Ukraine. Last year, when we gathered in the Parliament, I ended my remarks with a quote from Anne Applebaum, who last year published a wonderful book on the Holodomor, which was called Red Famine, Stalin's War on Ukraine. I have a quote for this year as well. In the very end of the book she says, "History offers hope as well as tragedies. Neither the Holodomor nor the repressions killed the desire for a just society and for independence of Ukraine." In that sense, Stalin has failed big time, just like Putin will fail big time. Just like any dictator who believes that he can break a will of a free people will fail big time. In Edmonton, this wonderful memorial has a touching, sentimental line, which ends with very simple words. "Let us all stand on guard against tyranny, violence, and inhumanity." I would like to thank all of you for doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I'd like to invite Igor Mikhailishin, the Executive Director and CEO of the Ukrainian Canadian Congress on behalf of President Bldg to symbolically read the names of children that perished during the Holodomor.
Дякую всім, thank you for being here. There are about, I'm going to read 85 names, this is the 85th commemoration. I'm going to try something interesting. I would like, there are about 85 of us here. So I'm going to ask Buddhist Gengula, who's the president of UCC Ottawa, to, when I read a name, to rise. And then I would ask that each of you, in sequence, that you rise as I read a name of a child that's been killed. There should be about 85 people here, and we will then do a moment of silence in their memory at the end. Hrihori Snitka, 10. Pavlo Snitka, 10. Varvara Vertushka, 13. Anatoly Havrilko, 14. Fedir Pogrebny, 10. Natalia Horishak, 11. Mikola Kotenko, 8. Yulia Lapa, 5. Vasil Matsyuk, 11. Petro Peritelets, 13. Mikola Ryabenko, 4. Petro Susitko, 12. Mikola Stadnik, 11. Grigori Tilyapnik, 13. Paraskovia Zuban, 13. Ivan Raida, 14. Yevgeny Shevchenko, 13. Natasha Pashchenko, 13. Ivan Romas, 2. Lydia Romas, 5. Petro Romas, 6. Mikhailo Haidar, 12. Valentina Dudichenko, 8. Ivan Karpenko, 8. Natalia Sokolenko, 13. Helena Sokolenko, 11. Maria Haidar, 9. Mikola Ziham, 14. Alexander Rashivsky, 5. Volodymyr Rashivsky, 3. Volodymyr Strizhak, 5. Oleksiy Usik, 13. Alexander Vok, 10. Oksana Shklyar, 7. Ivan Koshkalda, 7. Marusia Pashchenko, 13. Dmitro Bardakov, 9. Marusia Sugenka, 7. Grigori Yurchenko, 5. Maria Yurchenko, 3. Ivan Yurchenko, 14. Mikhailo Yurchenko, 8. Boris Kulish, 10. Maria Sirenko, 10. Vitaly Kulish, 8. Ivan Romanenko, 12. Serhiy Romanenko, 9. Oleksiy Krivochunko, 5. Fedir Krivochunko, 3. Ivan Krishtal, 10. Maria Znaiko, 10. Ustya Znaiko, 13. Alexandra Pashchenko, 6. Ivan Ritsenko, 2. Grigori Artyukh, 10. Hanna Bohatyr, 2. Andriy Ritsenko, 9. Maria Zhmur, 10. Maria Podusenko, 1 month. Ivan Artyukh, 9. Oleksiy Boyko, 10. Mikhailo Demidenko, 9. Varka Kravchenko, 9. Hanna Malishka, 1. Hanna Lysenko, 2. Vasil Tereshchenko, 2. Mikhailo Filatenko, 6. Ivan Mas, 3. Olha Vichivska, 6. Marusia Horbunova, 7. Peritsko Kolyada, 4. Dmitro Danilenko, 6. Oleksiy Mikolayenko, 1. Olha Nedorovichenkova, 4. Oleksiy Pavlenko, 1. Ivan Shabat, 10. Anna Yatsenko, 1. Hanna Kulika, 11. Alexander Omelyanenko, 11. Katerina Yarova, 1. Andriy Chokha, 9. Katerina Nestornokova, 5. Petro Timoshenko, 3. Vera Yaremlenko, 1 month. Let's take a moment of silence, please. Дякую.
Дякую, Ігоре. And now I'd like to invite Father Onufirko to say a closing prayer, followed by each night family. The choir first.
Oh,
Oh.
Господу помолімся.
Господи, помилуй.
God of spirits and of all flesh, you trampled death, you made the devil powerless, you gave life to your world. Now, O Lord, to the souls of your servants, the victims of the Holodomor who have fallen asleep, grant rest in a place of light, a place of verdure, a place of tranquility, from which pain, sorrow, and mourning have fled. As the good and loving God, forgive every sin of thought, word, or deed they have committed. There is no one who will live and will not sin, for you alone are sinless. Your justice is everlasting justice, and your word is true. Бо ти єси воскресення і життя і покой, усопших рабів твоїх, жертв Голодомору, Христе Боже наш, і тобі славу посилаємо, з визначальним Твоїм Отцем, пресвятим і благим і животворящим Твоїм Духом, нині і повсякчас і на віки віків. Блаженнім успенні вічний покій, подай, Господи, преснопам'ятним рабам Твоїм жертвам Голодомору, і сотворім вічною пам'ять. Христе, душі рабів Твоїх. Пам'ять їх зраду гріх.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That concludes our memorial.